Hi, this is Jacob Haller, the host of the Tell Me About Your Song podcast. As most of you will know, Pete Seeger passed away recently, so I had an idea that I would put out a special episode. I sent out an email to a bunch of people who have been on the podcast before, and one person who hasn't, and asked if they would be willing to talk to me for a few minutes on the phone about some of their memories of Mr. Seeger and his music. And a bunch of people agreed to do it, so I've edited it all together, and we'll present it here. So the first person I'm going to talk to here is Mr. G.W. Mercure. He has a young son, and I guess they watch a video of various songs, that have been animated. And one of them is the Pete Seeger song, The Foolish Frog. So we talked about that song, so let's take it away.
You see, there's a farmer walking down the road one day, and he was whistling a tune to himself. And he said, "Lord, I wish I knew some words to that tune, but all I got is the melody." Just then
It's kind of a live children's book. A farmer is out wandering around his banjo, and he's picking on his banjo, and he comes up with a really good tune on his banjo, and he says, "I wish I had some words for it." And he stops on a little bridge, and he sees this frog hopping from one bank, and the frog is kind of showing off and ends up falling in the water and making a fool of himself. And so the farmer has his song, right? He has the lyrics for the song. And he goes into the country store. And so he sings the song, and there's all these summer people in the store. And they all start having a party because the tune is just so good. Meanwhile, the rest of the little village is without all of the men of the village, who are all at the party at the country store, singing along and dancing to the Foolish Frog song. So the moms send all the kids to go and fetch their fathers, but the kids end up getting, hypnotized by this catchy tune. So the moms go, and the same thing happens, and the cows, and the chickens, even the barns, even the grass, even the brook. And so all that's left that's not in the country store is singing and dancing and eating soda crackers and drinking strawberry pop is the frog. And he's just sort of in midair because there's nothing else. All that's left is the road. So the frog goes down the road and he hears the song. He realizes that they're singing about him. And so he gets so swollen with pride that he explodes. And everything that was in the country store gets caught up in the explosion, and everything just lands back where it's supposed to be. The most irresistible thing about it is Pete Seeger doing all of the characterizations. He does the farmer and the clerk, and he does the frog, the cows. I don't know, I just sort of had this idea of Pete Seeger as austere and serious, And there he's, humming this tune as a cow, as a barn. It's really entertaining. The farmer is so tall.
In the cartoon?
It's so obviously Pete.
Yeah.
With the banjo. And,
Yeah.
That's another detail. Pete came up with this unbelievable, catchy banjo riff. I mean, the tune that he comes up with isn't really the song, Mm-hmm. He sort of gives it away to this other song. And I think that kind of says something about Pete. And I love the idea that he decided that it would serve this other song better than it would serve itself. It's obviously what I guess you'd call surreal or just silly, that the barns and the grass all crowd into this little country store and have a party. Anthropomorphic barns is pretty far.
That's... Like listening to it and then the grass is going.
Yeah. And
like when it's the cows, you're like, okay, cows, sure.
Cows.
Those are animals. They can go in and
chickens.
drink some soda pop if they want.
Yeah.
Chickens, but...
I like that the grass has such a healthy knowledge of its own purpose, We're the cows aren't around to eat us, and we're gonna grow too much, and so we'd better go find them, But I don't know.
Yeah, that's pretty excellent.
But it lends itself to the very dangerous thing of this is the postmodern age. The authors don't have to be on board for all of our interpretations anymore.
Sure.
I mean, it's a children's song. And I don't think it's anything more than that. It's a great children's song. But yeah, I don't know. It kind of strikes me as something, I don't know, purgatorial about this country store. And then everybody gets back to where they belong after, except for that prideful frog.
But none of it would have happened without that frog.
That's true. That's true. Those are the tricks of sin.
You see, there's a farmer walking down the road one day, and he was whistling.
Well, that was great. Thanks to Mr. Mercure for speaking to me about that song. Now, when I was growing up, I remember my family and friends singing some Pete Seeger songs. Waist Deep in the Big Muddy is one that I particularly remember that I grew up with. And so when I got the idea of doing this tribute, it seemed really natural to me to talk to my dad, Richard Haller, to sort of see what he thought about Pete Seeger. And so that's what's coming up next. Enjoy.
He's somebody that I've kind of followed throughout my life because, you know, like the Weavers, that was really an early introduction to that kind of music. Of course, you know, I was going to Old Sturbridge Village and listening to Bill Bonnion and so on.
Yep.
And so I kind of had a head start on the folk music business. But one of the records that we had when I was growing up, actually a couple records, were by the Weavers. And Pete Seeger was a prominent member of that group. We're talking here about 54, 55, and these were records that I listened to all the time. And one of the things that occurred to me, I guess, that hadn't really been noted in the obituaries and other memorial things that I've read, is that they were real internationalists. Pete Seeger is recognized, of course, as an American folk artist, but he really did songs from all over the world, and that was true of the Weavers. They did songs a song from India, one from Israel. They were the first ones, as far as I know, to introduce a song, "The Lion Sleeps at Night," you know, the Weevil Wet song. And have you ever heard their version of it?
Yes.
Yeah. Seeger's unbelievable on that song. I think. You know, that high tenor voice that with a kind of a yodeling thing, it's unbelievable. And this is something that he continued throughout his life. Guantanamera was another song that he introduced to the American public, and later on, Los Colores, you know that song?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one that at least that was the first person I ever heard do it anyway. And so that's an aspect of the guy that, you know, I haven't seen paid a lot of attention to, but it's important. He continued to be an influence. In the 1960s, I subscribed to Sing Out magazine, you know, and he wrote a column for that I read every time it came out. And, you know, he's just been somebody to follow. In fact, actually going back to the 50s, I can recall him being called before the House Un-American Activities Committee, and he didn't take the Fifth Amendment.
No.
Yeah, he claimed the First Amendment, freedom of association, freedom of speech, those things. You know, and he's just somebody, I mean, the spirit of the guy, and the way that he really never lost faith, it seems, in the future and what he hoped for it, you know. And it's great. And evidently right through to the end. He was all about participation, ownership, you know, all those things. Even at his concerts, that's what it was about. And later on, of course, his voice kind of faded, and then it was totally about that. Because, you know, all the singing really came from the people, but it didn't stop him. He kept on. You know the song "Turn, Turn, Turn"? I mean, that's an incredible song. He said he only contributed 6 words, but they were pretty crucial words at the end. A time for peace. I swear it's not too late. Those are the words that he contributed. Of course, he also contributed the chorus, "Turn, Turn, Turn," and the melody. You know, it wasn't a small thing that he did. But even to recognize that this thing in Ecclesiastes, written, 2,000 years ago, was relevant, and to put it to music and everything is credible. And actually, I was trying to think if I heard him perform it, but if I did, it was late in his life, because I originally heard Judy Collins do it, and then, of course, the Byrds did it later. They did that version, which was a great version, and evidently Pete Seeger liked it, too. According to him, his agent had told him, Pete, I can't sell these protest songs. Nobody wants to listen to them. Nobody wants to sing them. You have to come up with something else. And supposedly that was how he reacted. And it has a clear message, but it's not, I don't know, there's something about it that's just, it's really well put together. By the way, I did take some hope for myself when I saw that I believe it was his grandson, said that 10 days before his death, he was out chopping wood.
To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to
Well,
be
I
born,
really
a time
love to have the
die,
opportunity to talk to my dad about Pete Seeger and include him in the podcast, so
a time to kill,
thanks,
a time
Dad.
to heal, a time to laugh, a time to weep, to everything.
So next up is Daniel Wallette. Back when I interviewed him for the podcast, originally about his song, There Is a Wolf in California, we had a really great time. I really think that episode turned out well. So I was curious what he would have to say about Pete Seeger, and this is what he said.
I really have to say that the first time, any kind of realization of any song of his that I knew was not sung by him, but interpreted by Marlene Dietrich.
Oh.
Yeah, so I never listened to him. I knew who he was, and it turns out that I've known more of his songs as a writer than as a performer.
Gotcha.
So Where Have All the Flowers Gone is the song I know best by him. If you've ever heard Marlene Dietrich's version, it's quite compelling. I mean, she is someone who had lived through World War II, and actually she had left Germany, became an American citizen, and joined the U.S. Army, and was entertaining troops, and actually did some spy work for the U.S. government against the German government. So when she sings it, I think that it's very heartfelt and very compelling. And she sings it in 3 different languages, which I imagine for whoever the listener is and whatever language it is, may take on a different meaning for the listener. It feels like in any country's history, or at least in our own, it feels like every 10 years we're sending somebody off somewhere to harm's way. And so a song like that also doesn't really ever lose its meaning. It's very much relevant for every decade. And to use a flower, a symbol of something delicate and beautiful and immobile and cannot go anywhere unless someone else plucks it away, is interesting symbolism. I have people close to me who are in the armed forces, and I certainly, whenever there's going to be some kind of conflict, I don't want them to be there. And it's not that I think that the United States should, sometimes you do have to stand up for yourself, but you don't want to lose somebody. Even in our times, there certainly needs to be some sort of connection between the fact that no one wants a war, and it doesn't mean that someone is not supportive of their armed forces. It means that they don't want their armed forces to end up dying for what may end up being, not may end up. Most of the time a war is just something that possibly could be handled in a different manner. And that's probably a little light to say. But who wants someone to be sent away to be killed or sent away to kill someone?
Where have all the flowers gone? long time passing. Where have all
So that's Daniel Wallette talking about Where Have All the Flowers Gone? Thanks, Daniel.
Where have all the flowers gone? Young girls pick them, everyone. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn?
Next up is Rob Hinkle of the band Iliami. Earlier in the day, he spoke to Heather Lloyd, also of Iliami. Unfortunately, Heather couldn't join us on the phone, but they had exchanged notes, and so here's what Rob had to say.
My life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I hear the real, though far off hymn.
Being in the folk music scene, he's certainly got a position of reverence, a beautiful position of having sort of fathered not just a style of music, not just a style of playing, but a philosophy of how to approach the world. If you're not doing something positive with your life, if you're not doing something to better the world, what are you doing? And I think that's a really powerful message. 3 or 4 years ago, for his 90th birthday, we were invited to perform in a couple of different tributes here and there, and Iliami, isn't the folkiest of bands, but we come out of this culture, and so we were very flattered to be invited, and we chose to perform How Can I Keep From Singing for these things, like the Tacoma Park Folk Festival and some things for the Institute of Musical Traditions here in Maryland. And it's slowly become a part of our set list as well. It's as close to spiritual as Iliami gets, I guess, in this respect, and has become just a really powerful and beautiful song under the ministrations of Heather's voice. How Can I Keep From Singing was a song that Heather was really attached to because it's something that sort of has evolved over time, and it sort of exemplifies one of the things that Pete Seeger was really known for doing, where he had taken songs that had existed for a long time. Like I think this one had been around since like as early as the mid 1800s, and the song had evolved over time to do different things for different people. Doris Plen taught it to Seeger and added the final verses of what was presented to him, and then Seeger in turn sort of modifies a lot of the Christian wording and evolved it into more of a song of revolution, a song that went up against the witch hunts of the House Un-American Activities committees that were happening in the mid-50s there. And then continuing in that spirit, we actually brought it back to a little bit of its spiritual route and moved it a little away from the labor direction that he had pushed it. We live in a slightly different time now. So I think that the version that Heather adapted, it ended up having a little bit more optimism to it.
Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear that music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul.
With his association with the Folk Festival, there was an incident where the Folk Festival runs about 5 stages over the course of the day that it runs. And the year that Pete Seeger played, all of the other bands that had the same, it was like a 3 o'clock in the afternoon time slot, because of his position of being the father of the music that all these people were performing, everyone else refused their slot because no one wanted to perform at the same time as Pete Seeger. Everyone said, we got to shut down all the stages. We've got to all gather and watch him perform.
My life flows on, endless song, lover's lamentation. I hear the real low fall of him. It hails a new creation above the tunnels and the strife.
So thanks to Rob Hinkle of Iliami for talking to me, and thanks also to Heather Lloyd for providing her own thoughts and memories via Rob. We're going to listen to a little bit of a live recording of them performing How Can I Keep From Singing at an open mic they run. The last person who I'm going to play for you tonight is Mr. Joe Auger. Joe and I have played together for a few years now, and he had some memories of a particular song that he wanted to share. So here they are.
It was back in 1942, I was a member of a good platoon. We were on maneuvers in Louisiana one night by the light of the moon. The captain told us to ford a river, that's how it all begun. We were knee-deep in the big muddy, the big fool says to push on.
No, what's funny about that song is that's probably the first very formed memory I have. In all honesty, I was never, because I was more of a rock and roller or a pop music person in my younger days. That sort of really deep folk music stuff, Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, Pete Seeger, didn't really register with me until I was much later and was learning more about music and learning about more of the backgrounds of where a lot of the folk songs came from, like, obviously the Byrds did Bells of Rhymney and Turn, Turn, Turn. And it's like, oh, then finding out later, it's like, oh, that's where they got it from. You know what I'm saying? So, or that's where they heard it from. They heard his versions first and then did their takes on it, etc. With that song, The Big Muddy, I was a big fan of the Smothers Brothers. And I'm sure you know the whole story about when he was a guest on the show. And at the time, the censors basically said, yeah, that's not airing. Yeah, I forget the history of it, but I know that he did the song. So yeah, maybe he came back and redid it or something like that. And the footage has obviously since been released on DVD. What was that, 68? So, I mean, they were literally knee deep in Vietnam at that point. So it's the image that I kind of actually have of him, that big white sweater and that gorgeous 12-string guitar that he was playing, and without the beard, and he's a young man, and it's just like, that's the image that actually I tend to, when I think of Pete Seeger, that's the image I have of him, as that real rebel rouser. Obviously my dad was in Vietnam at that time. That song stirs up a lot of bitterness in me. And there's actually a picture that has always haunted me that I remember seeing of my father's. He had snaps and photos of his time in Vietnam with him and the people that were under his command and all this kind of stuff. And there's a picture of them literally fording a stream. Like they're going across the stream, and there's like one guy who's like literally waist deep in the big money, but he's holding up his gun like this, And then you see a couple of pictures sort of snapped in that series, and there's a picture of my father, and it haunts me still. It's a picture of him like sort of an aside, like a side. It looks clearly somebody else was taking the picture, but it's a picture of him at the moment his head is turned and they're being shot at, and like his face is like in horror, right? Mm-hmm. And it's one of those sort of pictures that has a deep resonance, because my father really never recovered from any of that stuff, and. Those are the kind of things that get handed down PTSD wise and into the family. So it's not to talk about my family, but that so there you go. I mean, it just gives you a good idea.
It was back in
Thank you, Joe, for sharing that. I appreciate it. A few years ago, Joe Auger, Natalie Markward, and I recorded a version of Waist Deep in the Big Muddy. So I'm going to go out and play the whole thing for you. If you enjoy it and would like a copy for your very own self, you can get it for absolutely free for at least the next few days from my Bandcamp site, jacobhaller.bandcamp.com. That's Jacob, HALLER.bandcamp.com. So enjoy it, and thanks for listening. It was back in 1942, I was a member of a good platoon. We were on maneuvers in Louisiana, one night by the light of the moon. The captain told us to ford a river, and that's how it all begun. We were knee deep in the big muddy, the big fool said to push on. The sergeant said, sir, now are you sure this is the best way back to the base? Sergeant, go on, I forded this river not a mile above this place. It'll be a little muddy, but just keep on slogging, we'll soon be on dry ground. We were waist deep in the big muddy, the big fool said to push on. sergeant said, "Sir, with all this equipment, not a man will be able to swim." "Sergeant, don't be a nervous Nelly," the captain said to him. "All we need is a little determination. Follow me and I'll lead on." We were neck deep in the big muddy, the big fool said to push on. I read the story of him, and I don't remember the country or anything, but he was invited to do a concert in some country with a somewhat repressive government. So just before he went on stage, he was given a list of songs that he shouldn't play, that he shouldn't sing. And so he went out and he said, "So I got this list of songs that I'm not supposed to sing, but it doesn't say anything here about you not singing them. So I'm just going to play."
So yeah, he had his set list right there.
Yeah, right. Well, all at once the moon it clouded over and we heard a gurgling cry. A few seconds later, the captain's helmet was all that floated by. The sergeant said, "Turn around, men, I'm in charge from now on." And we made it out of the big muddy with the captain dead and gone. Well, we stripped and we dived and we found his body stuck in a patch of quicksand. I guess he didn't know that the water was deeper than the place that he had been. Another stream joins the big muddy about a half mile from where he'd gone. We were lucky to escape from the big muddy when the big fool said to push on. Well, I'm not gonna point to any moral, I'll leave that to yourself. Maybe you're still walking, maybe you're still talking, maybe you still got your health. But every morning when I read the papers, that old time feeling comes on. Then we're waist deep in the big muddy, the big fool says to push on. Then we're neck deep in the big muddy, the big fool says to push on.
When I was 15 or 16, I had been trying to write songs for a couple of years, and I got the idea that I would send a tape to Pete Seeger. So I don't even know how in the pre-internet age I found his address. The songs were just terrible. So I sent it out and I kind of forgot about it. And then not too long after, I got a postcard in the mail from Pete Seeger. It had something kind of clever and funny on the front. And on the back it said something like, "Hey Gary, I don't have time to listen to any tapes, but my advice to you is just play on the streets, play for your friends and family." And it wasn't until years later that I realized what was on the front of the postcard. You know, one of those postcards of the solar system, all in black and white. It had a little white arrow pointing at one speck in the solar system. And then it said, "You are here." And I thought, oh, geez, thanks, Pete.
Just putting it in perspective for you there.
I kind of needed that reminder, I guess, at that point.
Got himself all wet, and the farmer laughed and started singing away down south in the Yankety Yank. A bullfrog jumped from bank to bank just because he'd nothing better for to do. He stubbed his toe and fell in the water. You could hear him holler for a mile and a quarter.
What would you say about him or his music?
Well, I used to confuse him with Bob Seger quite a bit, actually.
Sure.
He went down to the corner store, bought himself a plug of chewing tobacco, some groceries, and a pair of work gloves, and said, "Oh, before I go, I have to teach you my new song."
The way news shows always go, you know, they do a 20-minute interview and they edit it down to 30 seconds.
Yeah.
I was horribly amused by the fact that our boss there at the House of Musical Traditions, Dave Eisner, Yeah, he probably kept them for about 20 minutes or so. And one of the main stories they carried through was the fact that Pete Seeger had scribbled his set list for this wonderful show involving him and his various other family members, various other Seegers, and scribbled the set list out on a napkin there at dinner that they've got there at the House of Music Rotations. And the one little quote that the news show kept was Dave saying, "What, you're going to use it even though it's covered in squid juice?" An admirable non-cephalopod-feeling man.
They started singing, way down south in the Yankee Yank, a bullfrog jumped from bank to bank, and they were drinking the Coca-Colas and eating the soda crackers, stamping on the floor.
I found it absolutely hilarious because it was just, he made them sound like such fools. Because I was reading the transcript, and at one point he talks about, someone, one of them asks him a really stupid question, and he basically comes back with a snarky retort, mentioning Jesus Christ or something like that. And the transcript goes, the congressman goes, "Stop that!" And the only voice I could hear in my head was the voice of Graham Chapman as King Arthur in the Holy Grail. "Stop that!" So then I reread the whole thing using Monty Python sort of cliched, silly voices, and it's funny.
So all the cows left their stalls. They walked out of the barn, they walked down the road, they walked right inside that corner store, and they start singing moo, 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 moo. Cows' tails were swishing out the window, they were drinking the free Coca-Colas and eating the free soda crackers. Now meanwhile, out in the barnyard, all the chickens says...